Welcome to Speaking with Elvis podcast, the podcast of communication and mindset. This episode is about the power of saying no. Now, this is an important topic to really dissect because it is a topic that I've struggled with my whole life. I'm still struggling with it today. The power of saying no, the idea of saying no. I've struggled with that my whole life simply because when you grow up in a particular state of mind, when you lack self-confidence, you lack self-esteem and self-worth, and somebody who's been bullied in school, almost my whole school life, in fact, until even college. So now you have this tendency of self-affirmation, of validation. So that's why I struggle with saying no a lot of the times, because I just want to self-affirm. I just want to be validated. That's what I would always wanted to say yes whenever somebody's asking me a favor or want me to do something. I would always tend to say yes. And this, I have struggled with it my whole life, not knowing how to say no, because, when you say no, it reinforces that low self-esteem that you do have, that low self-worth that you do have. And having been bullied, so by saying yes, I kind of think in my mind that maybe it is the way to validate, to validate myself, to self-affirm that I have some level of value. That's why I struggle with that my whole life. Now, what it is the power of saying no? So you have to think about it. It is, as I mentioned, it's a power. When you say no, it's really a power to actually self-affirmation, a power to self-validate. I used to think that is the contrary. And something happened when I was growing up that only in hindsight, I realized it was something that's important that has actually transformed the way that I actually see myself, the way that my life actually is at this moment. So I grew up in the very tiny village of Cameroon, in the West Province of Cameroon, in the center of Africa. So basically, I grew up with my grandmother and other siblings. So in the village where we grew up, my grandmother was handicapped due to an injury to her arm. In that village, we only cultivate for subsistence. People farm for consumption. So there are no other activities in that village. Villagers only cultivate for consumption. So my grandmother, being a handicap, was not able to cultivate enough that can last us until the next harvest season. So which means there were times that we would not have much food to eat. And in those times, sometimes a neighbor would actually call us to give us food. In that particular instance, my grandmother used to call us and say this to us, that we can always say no even if we are hungry. So as a kid, it was kind of difficult to understand that concept. How would you say no when somebody offers you food at the moment when you are hungry? We couldn't understand that. The context was simply that in the village we grew up, it was a village where people can really do harm just by giving you food, can poison you or do other type of practice just by giving you something to eat. And that's the reason why my grandmother advised us that we can always say no even when we are hungry. So it was not comprehensible at that time. Only in hindsight that I understood the truthfulness and the validity of that advice. If you say yes to things that can be harmful to you, so you will lose your life, right? And it applies to our day-to-day life today. So which means that there are times that we say yes to things that can sabotage our own progress. We can say yes to things that are unimportant, because anytime that we are saying yes to things that are unimportant, we are saying no to things that are important to us. So how do you say no? You have to be able to say no, set the boundaries, like knowing exactly what you could do and the things that you cannot do. Knowing how to say no and setting that boundary. It doesn't matter what that is. Learn how to set the boundaries. It's how you exercise that power of saying no. So another way to say no is to distraction. Now we live in the digital world where we have so much vying for attention, social medias and things left and right, notification emails, things like that. And then we easily surrender to some of these distractions. So how do you really say no to this distraction so you can focus on what matters most? And this particular concept, the power of saying no, I lifted up out of my recent book, The Power of Your One Thing. So, which means if you want to singly focus on your one thing, you have to be able to say no. You have to cultivate the power of saying no. And the power of saying no, as it comes to digital distraction, is really carving the time when you say no to anything that can only distract you from that one thing that you are pursuing. So it's important to be able to be aware that all of these things are just distractions and that we have to be able to cultivate the power to say no to those distractions. Another place that we can say no to is to draining relationships. Now, sometimes, again, people pleasers like me, you might find yourself in a situation, whether it is in a relation where you are just coasting, even though sometimes it may not be something that's really good for you, but you just coasting simply because, again, you are a people pleaser, you want to stuff firm, and then you get stuck in sometime toxic relationship. It's important to know how to say no when something is not working. So you have to be able to say no to draining relationship. There are people in your life. It could be close. It could be people a little bit distant away who are drainers of your energy. So which means every time that you are with them, every time that you are speaking with them, you feel that your energy has been completely sapped. So it's important to be able to work on saying no to that type of people. And how could you say no to some of these people? And some of these people might be actually dear to you. It could be your family members, it could be close friends, but if they are energy drainers, you have to be able to find a right way to be able to reduce maybe the frequency with which you actually talk to them or you see them. So that's how you can start to work on saying no to draining relationship. I know some relationships you might not completely cut tie with them. It could be your spouse, it could be your children, your parents, or even any family member, right? It may be difficult to completely cut tie to some of these people, but what you can do is to reduce the frequency with which you speak to those people, the frequency with which that you actually see these people. You can reduce them. You can really create some kind of boundary, some kind of like fence around you, with your time, so that the moment that you see them, it's not as frequent as that would affect your own health, because every time that you are with them, your energy is completely sapped. Completely your energy is completely waned. So learn how to say no to some of these people. Then you will be able to cultivate that power of saying no. Yes, again, when we say often yes to things that are unimportant, we are saying no to things that are important. And that's why it's important to have priorities in life. When you create a priority, sometimes priorities in themselves cause you to be able to carve the time for it. In that book, The Power of Your Thing, my book, The Power of Your One Thing, I specifically said when you discover that one thing inside you, when you discover that thing about your life, now sometimes you don't even have to work on the discipline enough to be able to say no to certain things. No, the thing itself, because it is so powerful, it does create in itself time to focus on it. You start to focus on it. And once you focus on the particular thing in life, now you are saying no to other things that might cause distraction. That's why it's important to know how to say no. Again, there are many people out there who are people pleasers, and I used to be one of those, and I'm still to some extent a people pleaser. But the thing is, now I am fully aware of the fact that if I don't create boundary, if I don't select the things that are priorities in my life. Now, other things will fill the space of my time. That's why it's important to always create that priority. In the book of The Power of the One Thing, my book actually, so I kind of zero in on that one thing about you. If you want to achieve greatness in life, you want to arrive at the highest aspiration of yourself, if you want to become the best version of you, you got to create that one thing inside of you. It is only in creating that one thing that you find priority in life. You start to focus on it, and it becomes something that takes up much of your time. And you can reserve some of the other time when you're not working on that one thing for other type of distraction, like digital distraction, like friends, or even like just letting yourself for anything that comes in to fill out that space. So, but then it's important to be able to cultivate the power of saying no. Saying no, it's a virtue. In fact, when you say no, people respect you more because you have value, you have principle, they know you have standards, and they respect you even more rather than just saying yes at any time that you have any particular request. I found that the wrong way because, again, I've spent my whole life trying to say yes simply because I want to self-affirm, I want to self-validate, I was thinking that by saying yes, it's a way for me to be valuable, to self-affirm. And it was the contrary because people take you for granted. People use you anyhow. You don't really become more valuable by saying yes to any request that comes your way. No, you become even more valuable when you say to people, no, that I have other things to do, that I will think about it, but it's no now. But if I change my mind, I will get back at you. So by saying that, you really are letting people know that no, you are a valuable being, that your time is valuable. When they use it, they take it seriously. They don't just use it to use it. So that's why it's important to cultivate the power of saying no. And again, for me, I know that there are many people who are struggling with that, especially those who lack confidence, who have a low self confidence. They usually tend to say yes to a lot of requests, and also the way to cultivate that is to be able to zero in on things that are important in your life. Because when you start to work on things that are important in your life, you start to create that boundary, you start to create that space where it's only about the things that matter, the things that matter most in your life. So you just don't dabble, you just don't let anything come and fill out the space in your life. You know that there's something essential that you are working on. So that's why it is important to be able to cultivate the power of saying no. And again, saying no is a virtue. So because when you say yes to something that's unimportant, you are saying no to something that's important. Learn how to cultivate the power of saying no, no matter what stage you are in your life, whether you are people pleaser or you do set some level of boundaries. Knowing that saying no is actually a virtue is an absolutely important principle and standard to cultivate in life. With that, thank you so much for tuning in this podcast, and I will see you in the very next one. So we can talk about matters of communication and mindset. Once again, thank you for tuning in. See you next time.